pop off early, unfortunately, but I'm
Oh, no
excited to be
problem.
here
I know it's these
nonetheless.
days all the time. Okay, everyone. Hello. Welcome. This is the what will be the 500th episode of the Perception Action Podcast. Kind of I decided a few weeks ago to do a live kind of ask me anything. My real pleasure to have someone join me from the start. Tyler, well, I should say, newly minted Dr. Yerby. Nice to congratulate you face to face, Tyler. And thanks for joining me.
Of course. Well,
Yeah.
first of all, congratulations on 500 episodes. I feel like I've been along for the ride the entire time, and literally because I used to listen to them on my ride into work and then back home each day. So, congratulations on that. And then, obviously, thank you for the congratulatory remarks there regarding my doctorate. As you know, it's a lot of work, but it feels good to get it completed. And I'm happy
Yeah.
to be here.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. And yeah. So how this work, so I have a few questions that people have submitted me already. And if you're wherever you happen to be watching this, if you are, you can just type them in the comments and they'll show up here and we can have a go. And here is another Marianne as well. Hi, Marianne.
Hi. Is
Thank
it
you for
evening there or morning? I know it's
it's
evening.
noon here.
Midday.
And Tyler, is it 1 o'clock
It's
there?
2 o'clock here.
2 o'clock yours.
Yeah,
You're
you're
still ahead.
AZ time, so y'all don't
Yeah.
move times.
Yeah,
we do.
it's very complicated trying to figure it out. Yeah, so thank you for joining us, Marianne. So I was just telling Tyler, I have some questions. People submitted me, and then I will see if we get any online. It depends how, I know we're right in the US, we're right in, this is a holiday week, right? A
Big
lot of
day.
people sneaking out early.
Big
And
week.
so I appreciate you guys joining me. So thank you.
Have you said congratulations to Dr.
Thank you.
in the house as well?
Oh, thank you
Yeah.
very much, Marianne. As I mentioned to Rob right before you popped on, it feels amazing to have that work,
Mhm.
that weight taken off your shoulders. But then again, it was an incredible journey, and it'll only continue. So it's been a lot of fun.
And I need to get a wiggle on. And congratulations, Rob, for 500.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess it's it's a
Wow.
round number. You're supposed to celebrate, do something. So, but it doesn't seem like
I brought some non-alcoholic beers to celebrate with you.
Okay, there you go.
It's not.
I think it's probably a little early here for that, but for me, but go for it. Yeah.
No alcohol in it.
No. No, it's been quite. I'm not here. I'm not doing one of these things. This will be the last episode. I still have plans on going and
Yeah,
continue.
don't shock us here.
I find it fun. The biggest thing it does, well, I get to meet lots of great people. Like I would have never met you guys. But also it gives me kind of motivation to keep up with the literature, which I really like. Reviewing new articles and things. It gives me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have. If I'm not writing an article on volleyball, why would I read an article? So that gives me. So I do enjoy that side of it. So I don't plan on hanging it up anytime soon. So
that's good to know. That's good to know.
Yeah. So let me start off with here's a little. It's sort of a comment. To what I know what your answer would agree, but I'm interested to see what your thoughts are. This is coming from, I think you guys know in MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and things like that is one of the fastest growing areas where this is being adopted. I think
very much.
From my experience, starting with Greg Souders, who kind of put all these ideas and connected them on. It's really. But there's also I've had a question, people, how much do you think, and I obviously know what your answer is, but ecological dynamics constraints that approach is just another fad. How would you respond to that kind of in training?
I know how I'd respond to it, but I'll let Marianne jump in first if she wants to.
I don't mind. Okay, just a fad. Interestingly, I had a similar conversation about this today, and I think one of the reasons why people might think that is because a lot of the national governing bodies and other organizations add it as a tool for your toolbox, for your current, just something to add to your current toolbox, basically. And so I think that adds to the that illusion that it is just a fad. It's not introduced with any different underpinning.
Yeah. So just a new method. Just talk about the.
Yeah. If you get bored, you can't think of it. Have a go at this.
Yeah. I get a lot of that too, Tyler.
Piggybacking on that latter point there, I think that oftentimes it's not underpinned by anything of
Mhm.
substance.
Mhm.
I think that's a key point there. I also feel as though fads are relatively short-lived, and
Yeah.
this is decades in the making
It's
now.
been
So
yeah.
it's been a
Yeah.
minute. It's just been I think it's been catapulted in some ways and
Mhm.
harnessed more so by sports coaches in probably the past 5 to 10 years. But as you know, I mean, the ideas were initially conceptualized in the mid 90s, and then
Yeah.
the scientific domains that underpin ecological dynamics as a framework have been around for longer than that. So I don't think it's something that's coming in and then leaving anytime soon. I actually think that brilliant coaches out there have something that now explains some
Yeah.
of what they've been doing already. And that's why it seems as though it's a fad, because coaches are like, oh, like myself, like, oh my goodness, there's an entire framework that supports what I'd
Mhm.
like to do and some of what I've been doing. So
Yeah.
I guess that's the easiest way for me to describe it.
Yeah, I would give a similar answer. I think a fad to me is something like completely new, trendy thing. I get so many people tell me exactly the same thing you said, Tyler. Oh, I've been doing constraints, whatever, for years. I didn't know that's what it was called. I suddenly found this theory that fits what I saw was working, and I got super excited. So it's both old and new at the same time. I
Hmm.
think that's what separates it from a true fad. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're exactly right, and you're also correct in the fact that mixed martial arts and then BJJ. You mentioned Greg, of
Mhm.
course, being predominantly in BJJ.
Mhm.
It has just grown exponentially, which is what led to us putting together a paper that was released in
Mhm.
March around MMA. Is we have been just absolutely consumed with coaches from mixed martial arts that have reached out that are inquisitive, like very intelligent coaches that are asking
Mhm.
good questions, and to the point we were just discussing there, they've already been applying constraints in a somewhat meaningful way. They just needed to have a more solid framework in order to guide them. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to see what mixed martial arts will continue to do, because I think we're just scratching the surface.
Yeah.
Can I ask the two of you a quick
Mhm.
question on the back
Sure,
of that?
man. Mhm.
So, I think certainly in equestrian sports, a lot of sort of constraints have been used because
Mhm.
you can't talk to a horse. And there's a load of stuff that would be really similar, but there's a lot of constraining to constrain. They're trying to get
Mhm.
to an answer rather than constraining to afford. So that's an interesting one, and I don't know if mixed martial arts is similar. So that people who are really on the right road, and they've been using things intuitively for a long time, but it's generally to try and get to a particular point that they want to, and to take away the options apart from the right one rather than to open up other options. And often they're easier to help understand because they're kind of using constraints already. So there are people in different places in this.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, I've seen that too. I think the other one that I think that's really along with that that's changed. Another area that's it's really exciting to me that's growing is police training,
Hmm.
things like that. I think
Hmm.
that's really exciting. We had a good I had a good journal club the other day, and we talk about. I think really the changing view of what a fundamental is one of the things that I see really gaining momentum. From a fundamental, it's like the way Greg said, it's fundamental is an outcome. It's not a technique, right? That we've been so long being stuck in. You have to learn this way to do it. Whereas Greg, the idea of an invariant, I think, has changed the total way we look at fundamentals. So, but yeah, I think I do see a little bit of that, right? And constraining to constrain and not quite using it in the so if we just stuck with that, I think it would be a fad. I think it wouldn't go very far. But I think as people learn more, yeah.
I think some disciplines in mixed martial arts more so than others have
Mhm.
chased forms. They've chased katas,
Mhm.
these specific techniques that need to be executed, and they're often done in, as we termed, like passive or dead situations. Like just repeating this effort over and over to make it permanent, of course. And then all of a sudden you have resistance from an opponent, and things change very quickly. But then in other disciplines such as BJJ, while there's certainly drilling that's done, there's more alive movement problem solving, where there's a lot of changing situations that are occurring. And so I think it's kind of discipline specific. But mixed martial arts as a whole, if we take the UFC, if anybody, even if you're not familiar with the UFC and you watch it, you're like, wow, okay, there are a lot of ways that I need to help prepare a fighter to handle this constantly changing problem in front of them. And I think that's where we start to see coaches that, even those that are unfamiliar with ecological dynamics, that will at least set up activities where the fighter can try to solve the problem in a different way versus
Yeah.
it being repeating a technique, because they know that inherently, like the technique that is organized, let's say, is going to be very different from time to time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to put it. So, yeah. And also, I'd say, the fact this is still an evolving science, right?
That's right.
Ecological dynamics, ecological psychology, and dynamical systems. Yes, they've been around for a long time, but they're still evolving or understanding. We still argue about what an affordance is, right? We still, you go to any of the uh, ecological society conferences, people are still
Still
studying these
agree.
things and developing these ideas. So I think it will keep trickling down. It's not like a set thing we are hand passing out. These are still evolving ideas, and we're understanding them. I think so. I think that's the interesting part of it too. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think hopefully it won't be just a fad. I'll be disappointed, but I'm sure, like anything, the popularity might change, but we'll see. We're gonna keep pushing it, and we'll see. Um, so okay, oh, this is Gray Thomas. Here's a good one. This is a good question. I get this a lot. How what do you do with coaches that want to they feel, well, I get this all the time in baseball. We don't want to change things too much because the guys like it,
Mhm.
and it builds their confidence.
Mhm.
They like hitting the pitch where they know exactly what's coming every time, even though that will never happen in a game. How do you deal with how do you get guys to move off that? Do you have
I'm happy to tackle that one,
yeah,
and it doesn't
yeah,
surprise me that Gray asked that. Thank you,
yeah,
Gray, by the way.
yeah, thank you, yeah.
I know this is coming from a basketball
Yeah.
perspective, or I can almost guarantee you that it is. I've had to actually battle, I would say, this question a number of different times with athletes that are playing at a very high level in American football. And one of the things that I typically will do to begin with is I will ask them, what helps build your confidence in an activity that is only somewhat similar to the game itself, just out of curiosity. And they obviously know I'm coming from a place of care. So I'll deliver it in a way to where they know that I care. Like, I genuinely am curious, like, what inspires you to perform this activity in a dead situation where it builds your confidence. And oftentimes they end up while they're answering me, they end up answering why they shouldn't do it in a rote repetition manner. So I then usually will use that as an opportunity to explain to them that it could be just turned up a little bit to where maybe what they were doing was a 1 or a 2 in comparison to the 5v5 if we're talking about basketball. So we're not saying it needs to be a full game. It just needs to be, the dial could be turned up a little bit. That way there's some resistance from an outside, or the outside environment, potentially a defender, in some ways that will help them become more adaptable. And then that usually leads into a conversation around the importance of adaptability and the like. So this is where I do feel like having conversations with athletes, but from a place of genuineness and care, that I think leads to them realizing that maybe what I was doing wasn't overly fruitful. And I'll close by saying, and in baseball, Rob, as you know, is probably one of the worst about this, being resistant to it. Fine, you do that over there, but we've come to an agreement that we're not going to do it over here. And then we kind of part ways at that, and they can continue with some of their rote repetition work. And then we turn the knob a little bit in other activities.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that yeah, for sure. I try to do the same thing, try to discuss. And the other, answering the grades question, the other one, I try to think also kind of periodization of skill. Like, I think every practice has a purpose, right? Some of them are really skill development, skill acquisition. If you wanna do the confidence one where you hit the ball off the home run every swing, maybe we could do those closer to the game. But earlier in the day, or like farther we are from competition, can we do something more challenging, more variable, more
Mhm.
alive, in your term, Tyler? So I kind of accept the fact that players want to do this, but we can't be doing it all the time.
Mhm.
Right? We're not going to get any better.
And
So,
I should add real quick, Marion, before you
yeah,
jump in, I actually misread his question. He said where coaches want to.
yeah,
I would still attack it in the same
yeah,
way. And I actually have had far more of those conversations than I have with the athletes themselves. But I'll ask a coach from, position of genuine care, like, just out
mhm,
of curiosity, what about the traditional drills on air do you feel as though, or what athletes are wanting to interact with and what they're wanting to accomplish? So I would attack it from a similar place.
yeah.
Um, Yeah,
Marianne?
I was gonna pick on something similar. And I think actually before I say that, linking it back to the last question, I think one of the dangers in this may be being considered as a fad is when people just go all the way. Oh, everything has to be straight, so we're not going to tell them anything, and it has to look like this.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important to understand, where again, it's meeting people where they're at, isn't it, and taking them on a journey, linking into things like periodization, like you said, Tyler. What can you dial up? And with the coaches, and this is where obviously a big chunk of my work is. How do we get coaches to create great learning environments for themselves, where it's safe for them to learn, and they're going to pick up the information that they need in order to learn. And so again, I think that a lot of coaches hold on to that. Some of it is again ideas and belief systems that they've still got around perfect biomechanics. If they're doing it wrong, they're learning to do it wrong. There's a whole load of other stuff in there that I think is really important. So like I say, I try and get them to go, like, don't change everything. I mean, I know you both said that, like, don't change everything. Start by paying attention to what's going on. Choose something that you think is really good to work on, and then have sessions where you're open and honest about the fact that you're going to do something maybe a little bit differently, but where it's safe for you to explore as a coach and learn as a coach to use a bit more of a CLA, because you've kind of got this nestedness, haven't you? They've got the coaches are working with the athletes. The athletes obviously are also not used to it. If they're young, they've got parents who are not used to it. They've got a club or their employers who are not used to it. And so they need to be mindful of the nestedness and the sort of ecosystem that they're working in.
Yeah. Yeah. And go back. I'm sure. Great. Like basketball, the one I always think of is, you go to basketball and guys doing the same 3-point shot, exact same spot on the floor, no defender, perfect pass to them. All the players want to do that. The coaches seem, and the striking thing, if you go to an NBA practice, players will hit probably 90% for those shots. They're incredibly good in those. And then the game, they go down to 30. Like something happened here. But I think like Tyler, like, can we give you 2 or 3 spots on the floor to shoot from? Can we get a defender just running out? Can we add a little bit more to it?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be dramatic. It could just be someone that's moving at a relatively slow speed, or even just challenging them to try to hit a shot from different spots without trying to repeat the same shot from the same spot over and over. Or, hey, can you show me how you can make that shot in different situations or from different positions? So maybe it's a little bit deeper squat, maybe it's a little bit taller, maybe it's releasing the ball lower, which I know goes against technique, of course, if we're teaching someone how to perfectly release a ball. But I will add to this the part where he has the question in quotes, their guys like it. I feel in some way that you hear this from coaches that are protective because they still want to control the situation, that if they actually invited the athlete to the party, the athlete probably would tell them, no, I would prefer to do something a little bit different. But the coach wants them to do it and has created an environment to where it's unacceptable to be creative and to try to do things in different ways. So I do think this is where coaches can start to maybe bring the athletes alongside of them and help them, or let them help guide practice as well. And I think that's nerve-wracking for a lot of coaches because it means that maybe you're not the dictator anymore. So.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, I think that's, so moving them a little bit. Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it as well. Get people on. I think some people just don't think any differently. They think they're not allowed to. That's what I've been doing in basketball practice for the last 20 years. Why would I do any better? Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. That's always a challenge. I think they're, I think they're both coaches and players sometimes see it as kind of the confidence builder, but I don't. You're right. What confidence are you exactly building?
That's what I was getting at.
In such a representative environment,
Let's unpack confidence first.
Yeah, exactly. I'm confident that I can flick a quarter across the table but that doesn't really help me play a sport. So yeah, no, I think it's good. A question about, okay, let me see. Let me go back to this one. I had a question I want to ask you guys about kind of how you plan practices kind of short term and long term. Are you kind of fairly like you walk in with a plan of what you want to work in, or do you sometimes kind of let it flow based on what you see? They're saying I made a comment on Alex's podcast where I said, I didn't kind of walk in with a strict plan of what I wanted to work on. I just kind of watched and came up with something on the fly, which is kind of scary. But do you ever do that? Kind of let things, like, I always think of Craig Morris's quote, "Be prepared but not planned."
That's a great quote.
Yeah.
Just what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's a great quote.
Yeah.
Marion, I have a lot to share here, so I'm going to table it and let you start because it won't be fair for me to jump in. I've been asked this question about 100 times from individuals on different calls. So
I mean, I don't do a lot of practical coaching anymore. So again, I tend to be coaching coaches, but with the stuff that I do, far more than I used to, I spend a lot more time up front. So, which is easy with social media. So I will get people to send me videos. So instead of, for example, paddle sports, I'd often, we work with people for a short period of time or to do something because they want to go and be independent on moving water or, on the sea and be safe. And so it would be quite hot, if I'd have a rough idea of like, these are the bits, these are kind of like the big non-negotiables in terms of what I'm looking for to make sure I tick off before I then look at the next level, which might be more defining their or refining, their skill. And that was there's a lot of pressure there just to be able to watch somebody straight away, which again, we always would do in that environment. You wouldn't take a complete stranger into an environment you can't step out of without doing a really good analysis of their performance on the day. So that's very much integral to a lot of those sports because we can't step up. We can't just go, okay, let's can it, let's walk off. Quite often we're in an environment where we just can't do that. But so we do a lot more up front now. And I'd want to see videos and I talk to them about what they want to do. So I'm already more attuned to them, their needs, their performance at the beginning, which is really good. And then, I'll go for that classic Morris quote. I want to be well prepared, but not over planned. And again, I think that's really useful in any environment because quite often I'll be following something and then I'll go, all right, there's what we would maybe call a fundamental. You find something, you go, actually, that's probably what we need to work on because that's going to solve a whole load of other things, but I hadn't noticed it until this point.
I will piggyback on the attune comment you made there, Marianne, which I love. I have a section in my doctoral thesis that's becoming more water-like as a practitioner. And why I wrote that section is I feel as though that coaches, they feel as though they need to enter practice and they need to have 16 activities designed exactly, even if they're using a CLA, exactly what constraint they're going to manipulate, when they're going to manipulate it, for how long they're going to manipulate it. And I myself did that early on. I'll be honest, back in 2015, 16, when I was really starting to apply the ideas, I needed that as my comfort blanket in order to do so. Nowadays, I would be closer to probably what you stated on Alex's podcast. I will often go in with one or two softly assembled activities based on the SWOT analysis I did on them initially, but then also what I have seen as far as their unfolding behaviors from the previous practice. So oddly enough, I was asked this question by my partner in crime, Sean Mishka. We do a lot of our sessions together. We have all of our guys back right now. He asked me earlier today before we hopped on here, he said, hey, for so-and-so athlete who's going to be joining our learning environment tomorrow, because I won't be there tomorrow. Yes, Sean is leading a session on the 4th of July, America's birthday. And he said, what does so-and-so need? And I said, well, the two areas that we're really wanting to work on that he has struggled with as of late, catching the ball in traffic in tight spaces, especially whenever his gaze is not oriented towards the defenders that are downfield, the most immediate defenders, is where he has to make quick decisions. And then him being able to reach a defender, typically a defensive end or a linebacker, at great speeds whenever he's moving at an angle and they are moving at an angle. So those two, now those are very specific situations, very specific skills that he's needing to work on. Now, where did those come from? Those are often things he needs to do in the game. So those are problems that he finds himself in of varying nature within the sport itself, and there are areas that he could continue to improve. So I might say those are what we need to work on. I have an activity design for the second one that I brought up, and I'll set that up, but we have no idea what we're doing after that. And I say that honestly, because as coaches, to Marianne's point, we're attuned. We might see one of the other players, maybe one of the NFL players, and we might see that they're struggling to release off of the line as a defensive end in order to be free to attack the ball carrier. Well, then we might have an activity to where there's tighter traffic in the middle and we create an activity from there. We also heavily lean on the athletes themselves. And this is something I've talked about before, where I might say to so-and-so, how would you turn the complexity up on this a little bit? Because you're solving problem after problem after problem, and they continually are changing. And typically they'll say something along the lines of, well, I need to be doing this at higher speeds. Okay, great. And we'll open the space up a little bit. So that's a purposeful size manipulation of the space in order to make it more challenging for that particular individual. Now, I will say that takes a coach that's willing to let their athletes be a co-pilot. Number two, it sounds as though you're less prepared and you're coaching less, but you're actually more prepared and coaching more by doing so, because you have to be engaged within the practice itself. So I'll close by saying if we don't have specific activities, we at least have a global intention for the day. So the global intention may be today is a highly exploratory day where we're encouraging behavior that might be a bit different than normal. And that could be hitting shots from a different place. That could be hitting a ball to the opposite field. That could be trying to be elusive and performing spin moves and the like. So I could keep going. I don't want to consume your 500 episodes.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think for the most part, I'm like, I think it depends a little bit on the level. Like high level athletes, where you're looking at more optimization, you're working on super specific things, like Tyler, like getting there. You're not working on catching in general. Like they got that down. Right. So you do have to come a little bit more based on their kind of data you collected and things, but. With lower levels, I kind of think of it a little bit like parenting. I think there's teachable moments. So sometimes, like a game before, someone made a couple errors. That's a good time to work on. Sometimes with kids, I think I said this before, I just let them play and then I kind of walk around and observe. Oh, they miss a lot of serves. So how about we work on serving for a while? Like I think the people when people are open, they can kind of see the value. So
can I just add a little bit in though, Rob? I think it's harder for coaches who are less experienced, because they have less of a repertoire in terms of being able to sort of scale, and dial up and dial down complexity and other things in a session, and also maybe not as attuned to activities. And I keep thinking about, how do we help them to set up activities that allow them to observe and make decisions, rather than how do we set up activities that allow them to just teach something? So, and those are different activities. So what are good activities that would help you to observe things and pick out, like you say, those big blocks that then you can go and, like say, find a coachable, teachable moment and then teach something, but make it easier for the more novice coaches.
Yeah, I think I gave a term to that a long time ago: diagnostic constraints, where you put something in for the coach to kind of see how people respond, and it gives you ideas for what to do next. That was kind of the idea I thought of. But yeah, no, I think that exactly that we don't often talk about strengths manipulation for the coach's purpose rather than the athletes, but I think that's a good idea.
One that I would add to the point you made, Rob, especially with younger athletes, or the point you're making, Marianne, with younger professionals with utilizing an ecological approach. Maybe they've been doing it for 20 years as far as coaching, but maybe they're new to using this framework. One homework assignment that we often give to individuals involved with the Movement Academy at Emergence, and this is for a myriad of different sports, so this is not just American football, they are required, if you will, air quotes, to go out and watch film or watch in-person interactions or watch film of the athletes that they're working with. And then they will design one activity and they will write down possible constraints that could be manipulated. And what that does is require them to then actually engage in the activity that's unfolding. And if all of a sudden they're seeing a lot of errored passes, or to your point, right, a lot of missed serves, whatever it may be, okay, I've considered manipulating numerical relations, the size of the space, the size of the ball, the size of the racket, whatever it may be. And then they purposely manipulate that constraint based on what they see unfolding. And that's worked really well for the coaches that we've engaged with, because they feel as though they have a bit more confidence in in making those purposeful manipulations versus it being just a kind of a random willy-nilly one, or whether it be they come in and they don't have anything written down whatsoever and they become a bit nervous, because obviously that's not comfortable.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just here's the question. I've got this one a few times. I just need to hear you guys' thoughts. Slow motion movements.
Ooh.
The value of like doing a golf swing in slow motion for learning. I don't know if there's running. But usually this is a big thing in golf. Maybe in baseball a little bit too, but golf's the one I usually associate. What are your guys' thoughts on the value of doing slow motion?
I think the timing of the degrees of freedom and beyond just the motor system, the movement organs, as Bernstein would call them, I think the timing of them coming into relation with one another, so where their perception is oriented, their intentional degrees of freedom, and where those aims may be flowing at the time, coupled with how they are bending their elbow and rotating and the like, I think that it makes it a bit more difficult in some ways for them to put those together successfully whenever they're expected to do it at higher speeds.
Mm-hmm.
But if I could tweak maybe the question a little bit, because it is a really good question. One thing that we will do for athletes that are struggling because that's beyond their grip. We have high school kids that are out or college kids that are out. They're performing with NFL football players, guys that get paid millions of dollars a year. It's beyond their grip. We might actually have them slow down. We'll say, see if you can slow your tempo down just a little bit, along with like educating their attention, because what that typically will do, they're just moving for movement's sake, and they're not actually picking up the orientation of that individual's hips or their arm slot or whatever it may be. So we frame it a little bit differently. So we're not saying, because the way I read that question is slow motion would be like,
it's
like
very,
literally here, because that would be trying to like groove that pattern, if you will.
Yeah.
I don't want to groove a motor pattern. I want them to be able to pick up the relevant information. So I try to connect it to the environment. That would be how I would answer that.
Yeah. Marianne, do you have any?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And there are some things like Feldenkrais. I know you're familiar with a little bit, Rob, and I am. Often it's about slowing down movement, isn't it? And but in an internal focus of attention to awareness. I don't tend to use things like that. One of the things I do use, and I think I think that if we do something like, say, in slow motion, even if you think you're grooving it for speed, you're not, because it's totally different movement, isn't it? Once you've got, you're not using the same muscles. That like nothing's the same. Like none of it's the same. So I think using it in that way is a bit of a misnomer. One of the things I have done, more things like paddling, is add resistance. So, for example, it's really difficult for a beginner paddler, particularly, to connect their whole body and be able to transfer power through the kinetic chain. For many reasons. They tend to just do like, the paddling bunny. So basically they're just using their arms, and then everything from like the shoulder all the way down, all the big muscle groups, the whole body down to the feet is doing nothing. And you want that to be through your entire body. So you want to be using your body through diagonals. And when you are in moving water or strong winds, you'll get a feel for that anyway. You have to engage or at speed. So I tend to do things like get them to tow something. So add resistance. So even though they are slow and they are in slow motion, but they're having to engage the body in the way they would do if they were moving quickly. Yeah. So those are the only, or more, hopefully more the way they would do if they're using quickly, because resistance is stabilizing the movement. It's helping them to actually connect and develop that movement pattern, that coordination pattern. But it takes away the instability of the speed because of added resistance instead.
Yeah. No, I think you're good. I'm not a big fan of this at all, slow motion, even though this is one of these things, lots of famous golfers have done it, so it's hard to fight it. But my biggest, I think the constraints when you move slowly are completely different than when you move differently. Like, think about how easy it is to hit a ball flush on the face of a golf swing when you only have to swing super slowly compared to at top speed. I think it's a very different skill. I think what both Marianne and Tyler are talking about more is scaling it down to make it easier, but you're keeping it coupled still, the same information, the same thing, but either by, I'd rather use a bigger ball or something like, or have a wider fairway. You hit it anywhere you want, then you do slow motion. right? So, so we're talking about simplifying it instead of slow motion is kind of breaking it apart.
I mean,
You're right. Yeah.
that's a fundamental part of nonlinear
Yeah.
pedagogy. I mean,
Yeah.
task simplification.
Yeah.
That way, one can develop relevant information movement couplings. That's one of the key principles of NLP to begin with. Which is, Rob, you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, I'd rather manipulate the size of the ball. That way, there's a larger face to come in contact with versus truly slowing that swing down.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, if we're talking baseball, have slower pitches, right? At least you're still doing the same action, basically. But yeah. So I've never been a big fan of that, but I know a lot of people like it. But I think you're right, Tyler. The essential purpose of it is to kind of groove a motor pattern or get you to feel the positions, which we don't really think there's much involvement of that in actual high level skills. So yeah, I don't think it's very valuable. Yeah. But that's interesting. Yeah, that's a good question though. I got asked that a lot of time. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple more here I wanted to. Okay. So, okay, I'm not sure. Let me look at this one. Okay. So, coach, here's this. I think we can lead off to another question. Coaching in a group session, right? I'm not quite sure what you mean. Focusing. I guess the limits of individualizing practice when how much, Tyler, when you work, the example you gave a receiver, do you ever have a situation where you're working with 6 receivers at the same time and you can't quite do that level of
This is a great question, and I knew right when I started reading it what they were getting at because I've ran into this situation a number of different times, and we actually will have this. I started to touch on it a little bit earlier. We'll have a global intention for the day. That global intention's for everyone that's involved. Like today is a pure creativity day. We're encouraging every mover in today's session to be highly creative, search for different ways of exploring how you can cut, slice, whatever it may be, to the point of catching the ball. Okay, most of the time in football, you're taught triangle, you're catching it way out in front of you. Well, there are a lot of times where I work with defensive backs and I'm helping educate their attention to quick degrees of freedom coming out. That way they can knock the ball down. So then on the opposite side, it would be with the receiver, show me how you can catch the ball late to your body. Show me how you can catch the ball out in front of you. Can you high point the ball? Can you catch it on your shoulder? Like you're actually encouraging and nudging them to try to catch it in different ways. So that might be the global, like the intention for the day. But then I, as the coach, or if it's myself and Sean, and we have another individual named Blake that's out there oftentimes, that's when we would then pop into a particular conversation with an individual during a 15-20 second break and say, hey, 360 search now, looking to pick up everywhere. Or it might be, what have you noticed about the linebacker that's on the backside? Like it's something specific for them, but the global intention is that day. So then in this situation that Tone is asking here, you could educate their attention maybe to where the ball is in relation to the server. But then you could then pop into that particular individual if you saw different behavior that was emerging and educate their attention in a different way.
Yeah. And then, I think that's for me the secret. You can still have an overall, and you could give them that individual different constraints. You're allowed to only return with one hand. That's a silly one, but you know what I mean? You can give different athletes different constraints based on in the same overall practice session. Marianne,
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I don't coach in team sports, not since I stopped coaching bowler. It's just fun. Sometimes groups. I think I'm just thinking about whether they necessarily need to be changed, because quite often the constraints that we might manipulate in the sports that I coach are not rules, because they don't really have rules. The boundaries and is the environment. And so if we want to educate attention, for example, we might use the constraint we might use is manipulating the environment so that that's louder. I mean, you've talked about it. Make it a pink envelope.
Yeah.
Words, Rob.
That's
louder to the horse and the rider. So, and that's manipulating a constraint that supports an education of intention. And again, we could do that with an education of attention. We could do that with an education of intention as well. So I think you can do both. And in like a group lesson, you would have you can't have them all doing completely different things, obviously. So it depends entirely on what you're doing, doesn't it? So you can still have an intention that's for everybody, but like you say, you can scale, you can make them more or less spicy.
Yeah.
The challenge for each of the individuals, while staying roughly the same and using some constraints to hopefully create pink envelopes in terms of affordance perception, which is going to help education there, attention as well.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a challenge, I think. But I think we all recognize at some level we need to individualize, especially when you're getting to the really high level athletes. Right? You need to really get focused on their weaknesses, what they're not good at, so that we're not going to be the same. Yeah.
One more thing here. So I mentioned that we have our guys back right now. We have high school all the way to pro. Well, it's pretty obvious here that most of the sessions are designed around the handful of NFL guys we have, because they're playing at the highest level. They're probably paying us a little bit more, for the sessions. We want to help everyone, but that's allows for us to be out there. So it's not specifically for some of the high school kids or college kids, but that's not to say we might not run over there and mention something to them in particular. But the fact of the matter is they're then embedded within movement problem solving activities. So they're linking themselves to the greater environment out there versus it being just like a sprinting in a straight line or hitting off of a tee or serving or hitting off of a serving machine or whatever it may be. Like they still are interacting with a changing environment, which is beneficial for becoming a better mover.
Yeah, I think it's good. Here's one I got before. I'll ask you about this one, Marianne, first. Negative affordances. I'd say this is always a tough one. Pain, injury, like any thoughts on how coach around those, diminish those? This is a super hard one. Yips, any kind of thing like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I and both of you will obviously know Kathy Sierra's work on pain science. Obviously, Tyler, influenced very much by you and Sean, and is it Lorimer Mosley and other people's work on pain, which has really helped me become more informed in this area. Obviously, it's not. If I was really concerned, I would ensure that they went to somebody who was a specialist in that area. But I think getting to the point where you go, actually, there's no tissue damage being done, but the body is being protective. And somehow we need to, what Kathy calls, give the body credible evidence that it's not at risk, and start from that point. So having a look at what they can do and finding, building those type of activities. So quite often it would be sneaking a movement in that maybe is just a little bit different to what they currently think they can do. And and again, just always being mindful of ensuring that there isn't any current tissue damage.
Yeah.
But it is a tricky one, definitely. And I think in terms of prevention, that's probably where a lot of people I know who would start to understand CLA realize that actually the biggest impact it's going to have, as well as people being more skillful and dexterous movers, is that they're less likely to be injured.
Yeah. Avoid it in the first place. Yeah.
Avoid it in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a tricky one for me. I've dealt with a few cases of, example that comes to mind. I've dealt with some pitchers in baseball that lose the control and they actually are worried about hurting someone by hitting them. So what I've ended up doing, I've done a couple times where I've had basically a hitter come up wearing a suit of armor, essentially, right? So there's no possible way you could hurt them. Things like that, where you get kind of extreme to take away that reduce the impact of the negative affordance. Pain is harder one because you don't know how that's internal. You don't know how the person's going to feel when they land. You can make it, I guess, safer environment, but like a knee injury that could happen anytime at the most safe situation. So, Tyler, do you have any kind of?
Yeah, this is a little bit above my pay grade as far as how to attack the pain one. I mean, there are far better experts out there. I haven't dealt with it, to be honest, very much. And so it's not an area that I've had to explore myself to get better at. The example you gave as far as the armored suit and the pitcher, I've had some situations where players are find themselves in positions to where they're A, not confident, they're B, they're not exploring what they can do because they're so fearful of what they might do. And oftentimes it's just scaling the complexity of the activity to the point to where it's it would be something they would consider to be very easy, moving at slower speeds, but not slow motion speed, but moving at slower speeds. I've had that in tackling before. And we're not in our learning environment. We're not bringing people all the way down to the ground, although there's a lot of physical contact, but they're fearful of blowing an ACL because they're a high school kid and they're practicing with a $20 million player.
Mhm.
And that's a challenging situation. So kids you'll see their degrees of freedom across the system freeze up when they get closer to that athlete because they're fearful of hurting them. And that's where I'll walk over to them. Hey, just slow down, be like water, fluid here. See if you can move at a little more of an ownership speed and, control your tempo some and see if you can pick up how they're moving. Or then I might go a little bit further and say, what have you noticed about the sharpness of their cut whenever they're catching it on the outside? So I'm trying to educate their attention to that quick foot that's planting into the ground, which is going to allow for them to move side to side. And that typically helps them move with more ownership speed, and they're better at it.
Yeah, and I think getting their attention external as much as possible from whatever task constraints the environment, that helps too. I guess stop thinking about so much about your knee. Right? Yeah. That it's a natural thing, but it's you can break it that way as well.
Go ahead, Marion.
You gotta
go.
No, I was just going to
run, Tyler.
I was just going to say, when you said that at the very last second there, I completely forgot about the fact that I have dealt recently with some snow sport athletes, ski and snowboard athletes, to where they're latter stage of ACL, returning from an ACL injury, and they're about to get back into gates and start kind of exploring and sliding and gliding on the snow. And it's just educating their attention outwards, they're, and then not only that, but then once they then get back on the mountain, it's having them operate in a similar area to where they may have become injured before, but at far, far lower levels of complexity. That way they build that confidence, if you will, to actually ski or board in those situations, because they're getting back onto some of these mountains where they've had like almost career-ending injuries. And so all of a sudden now they're not even wanting to explore flips because they're just afraid to stand up on the skis. So it's having them do it at much slower speeds and maybe on some bluebird days.
Yeah. Again, kind of simplifying again.
Correct.
I think it's a good way to think of it. Yeah. You got to jump off, Tyler.
I do. Thank you so much for having me. And more importantly, thank you for 500 episodes. It's been very, very informative to my career. And I think I speak for everyone when I say it's been very helpful across the board. So thank you.
Well, thanks for joining me for this, Tyler. Appreciate it.
Marianne.
Yeah.
Bye, Tyler. Good to see you. Oh, it's just me.
Yeah. So, Marianne, of course. So, what you do? Obviously, you're more in the coach education side of things. Myself included. What are kind of the persistent issues you're still kind of seeing out there? Broad.
I think at the moment there's almost like a lot of coaches have recognized that that when they're coaching, they need to be more athlete centered, more individualized. And all these things we've been talking about, sort of using constraints, making things more representative, etc. But coaches in their education are not getting that at all.
Yeah,
that hasn't changed yet. And so coaches are kind of in the situation where what they need to do is changing, but actually they haven't had any support to upskill in order to be able to manage that. And I think that then adds to the using it as another tool in the box. And especially a lot of coaches historically, a really detailed understanding of perfect technique or perfect biomechanics has been their currency. That's they feel that's actually what makes them a great coach, that they know this stuff. And so that's a bit challenging.
Yeah, that's something I'm grappling with too. Often, you see coaches that have been coaching and observing movement for a long time, right? They know something about what an effective movement strategy is and what effective way to do it is. How they can put that knowledge in there, I don't think any of us want them to completely throw it away and just let the athlete flail away and figure it out. Like you have knowledge to help guide the athlete and support them. So, but how they're struggling, when and how to use it, I think is a challenge.
Yeah.
And
one of the things that's come up again recently as well with coaches is that this in some sports, and again, I'm not sure if this is in all sports, but and particularly some of the sports like skiing, for example, equestrian sports is another good example. The movement that they're being moved toward, and actually someone said the same in tennis, actually, in teaching young tennis players a serve. They're trying to teach a serve that they might need in the future, but isn't the solution that they need now.
Right.
And in equestrian sports, I'm sure I've given this example before, beginners, what they want to be able to do is not fall off. That's the movement problem they're trying to solve primarily, is to not fall off and to be able to give some haptic cues to the horse. Whereas an elite rider wants to be able to maximize the power and agility of their horse. Exactly the opposite.
Yes.
And you can't make that shape unless your horse is powered up and lifting its back underneath you anyway. And I believe the same, I've been told the same is with swimming. So elite swimmers, the speed that they're moving creates the affordances for them to have a different technique, as it were, to somebody who's moving very slowly. So there's a lot of trying to coach for a solution that they think they'll need once they become more skillful.
Yeah.
Rather than coaching for the solution that they might need
right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Kind of once you kind of look at the stages of, when we're in kind of the optimization stage, right? Some of those wouldn't be appropriate for a newer learner. That's a tricky. Marianne, a couple of people. So where you have a lot of resources you've developed as part of UK coaching, is there a good website? I've had people asking about where you can find.
Yeah, Sunny. So if they go into UK coaching, well, we have membership, which is for my computer's telling me it might go dead, which it shouldn't do.
Okay.
If I disappear, that's why. Let me just.
Okay. Oh, no problem. UK coaching.
UK coaching, yeah, ukcoaching.org. But if you Google UK coaching, it's popped in there. You'll find it. And the membership used to be £24 a year. It's gone up a little bit, but that gets you loads of resources.
Okay, yeah.
Loads of resources. And as you know, I built curated and wrote with many people. You're one of the few people, actually, I haven't managed to get to write anything yet. I mean, pretty much everybody has supported it. Tyler, Craig, Marcus, everyone, Martin Rothwell, loads of people have created bits. So it's a whole set of resources around skill acquisition. Then there's some stuff also within designing practice. Danny Newcomb's put a lot of stuff into there, Will Roberts, people like that. So there's a whole set of resources there, and we also run other things. And what we're building at the moment now is resources for coaches.
Yes.
And looking at resources that we can, not resources for coach education. So for people who are tutors, assessors, and we're trying to say actually probably need to be both, because assessment should be integral. It's how you learn, it's how you pick up information.
Yes, for
being
sure.
able to assess your own performance as a coach. So so we're doing an awful lot
on this. Okay.
Yeah,
that's a good one. That's another question I get a lot. Like, how do you know whether this is working?
How can a coach assess their own performance without having to have somebody, sort of like parachuted in to tell them what they're doing wrong, and almost error correcting them in the way, it's just like taking the same principles up the next level.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, what might this look like for a coach?
Here we got one, Marianne, that might be up here. Question: training ideas for bouldering.
Oh.
Other than manipulating constraints,
Yeah.
I don't know. So this is something I get on people. So if you understand what a constraint is, like there's nothing else you can do as a coach.
Yes.
There's literally nothing else you can do. Everything you can do as a coach is a constraints manipulation. Yeah. I don't mean to be that, but that's because the constraint includes verbal, what you say, what rules you make, what equipment. Yeah. So everything. I think it's better to think about always in terms of, it's a very useful concept to think of things in terms of constraints. So that's my pitch there. Sorry. I didn't mean to, but that's a common thing I hear. So I just wanted to put that out there. Yeah.
It'll be really good, Martin. I would love to hear your thoughts as well when I finished, and whether, at what level you're exploring this. So one of the things I love about bouldering is that it is, it's called, they're called problems. They're movement problems, which is really nice that you're solving. And some of those movement problems might be solved very quickly, and people will often, what they call project, they'll work a boulder problem sometimes for years, which is crazy. And they'll try it hundreds of times before they get it. And they'll actually work a problem for long periods of time before they manage to do it. I think if you're coaching bouldering, one of the things that, and this is indoor climbing as well, I think one of the things initially I struggle with is route setters when it's artificial bouldering walls have a habit in this country of, and I'm going to get shot down by them now if they don't do this.
I should say Marion's a climber. In case you don't know, that's why I said this is right up her alley. She knows a lot about this personally. Yeah.
But they just put big holes and then they leave the footholds the same and put big handholds. And so what they're doing is they're pulling you towards a dysfunctional movement solution, which is just to do one-arm pull-ups. And whereas what you want to encourage is use of feet. Balancing on the feet. So I would do the opposite. So beginners, I'd just give them bigger footholds.
Yeah.
And start to reduce the handholds. So just think about, good movement problems and what you're trying to get them to do. And again, Martin, it would depend whether you're indoors or outdoors, so if you want them to do jamming, what are you going to make a nice, easy solution? If you want them to learn flagging, how do you set up a boulder problem that just really invites some of those different movements? And the nice thing is if you've got a wall, you can just move the holds around. You can actually move holds around, which is great. You can't change the gradients of the walls, but there's usually different gradients. And then games where you do, I'm sure you already do this. This is sort of very easy stuff where you can get the people you're coaching to create different alternatives. So, for example, you do like an elimination game. So, can you take one hold out? And it might be a different hold depending on the climbers, because some of them might be very tall and so they're able to reach, and then other ones can sort of like scrunch themselves up and balance in the way a tall person wouldn't be able to do. So I think the thing is to encourage the route setters, if you've got them at your wall, to really think about skill acquisition. It is a real skill, setting routes, and just find some great places outside and really explore places where you can make them easier and more difficult. But you can do it with verbal things as well. And there's some great books as well. I think Games Climbers Play. There's a book on climbing games. I think British Climbing or BMC have written.
Okay, cool. That's really good. I loved your first example there, Marion. I think it's a great example. You can just change things randomly, but more often than not, we want to try like a purposeful So I always start, what can I change or add or do differently that's going to push people in the direction I want? Like, and you said, like changing footholds instead of handholds, right?
Yeah.
That's purposeful choice, not just random.
Yeah. And going to think about what are the movements that you want. So in bouldering, like wall climbing, you want them to be able to get their hips as close to the wall as possible, which means they normally have to turn sideways. So having, or drop a knee or flag another foot, put it somewhere, pretend there's a hole, for example, or just use it as a counterbalance somewhere. But having boulder problems that really accentuate or invite that affordance is really good. And thinking about, like, what are the things, the key elements we want them to pick up to be a skillful climber.
Yeah. I think that, for going back to the start, that's for me why the concept of a constraint is valuable. Like, constraint is taking something away to kind of push you, like, to explore something else. That's why we call it a constraint. It's constraining the possible solutions you could use. So yeah, I think that's why we like that concept. It's useful. Sometimes it's counterintuitive for people at first, but that's the idea. Those are great examples.
Yeah, and I'd be interested for Martin if that was helpful, or if you something more specific. It would be good to know.
Yeah, I'm sure you have a lot more specific. That's a good question though. That's another. Well, I think it's been for a while. I think that's a sport where exploration is inherent in the sport, so it's kind of. I think, but I know a lot more climbers are getting into using this kind of approach.
Yeah. And there's other things that are really nice in bouldering. It tends to be sociable. People, get the people that you're coaching to set their own problems. Go and find a problem that you can set that you think's at your level. And get them each to set their own, and then they can share it and coach it. So they're actually designing their own problem to work on something. It just engages a different level of engagement and attention than if you just give it to them.
Yeah,
so you can do that. Like, there's this space. Go and design yourself a 4-move boulder problem to work on X.
Yeah,
get them to
I
really
think,
think about that.
yeah, that's something Tyler was talking about too in his football examples. I think I don't talk getting people involved in the actual co-adaptive practice. It's such a valuable tool. It's
Yeah.
it's not easy at all sports and all levels with kind of the systems we have set up, but it's a very valuable tool. I think to me, there's the work, kind of optimal theory work where you just kind of give the person some meaningless choice. I think it's more valuable. They can see right through that. You let them choose what color ball you're going to practice with.
Yeah.
Give them something more meaningful. So even kids, let them pick a constraint and
I've even done things where I've got with kids when I used to coach a long time ago at in North Wales at the academy, and we get them to set problems for each other. It gets them to pay attention to what they think the affordances are and the weaknesses are in each other. So, and then design something that they can do but other people can't, and you can get like just as games that kids like playing. And we're doing so that they're doing lots of like co-design, but also designing and paying, and it gets them to watch the solutions of each other as well.
Yeah,
and they're solving problems.
Yeah, no, I think that's I had a question about that the other day, kind of the interactions between your athletes when you're working in a group session. I think you can't control them and plan for them, but I think they're extremely valuable. Like they give each other feedback and comments and demonstrations, and I think that's really good. Yeah.
I need to tell you a quick story, actually, if that's all right. My son was doing a route. It was a sport route, pretty hard one in Llandudno and he had some people watching him, and he wanted to do it on site, which means you can't see it, you don't watch somebody else, you don't have any beta. They've got these climbers make up their own rules, these socially constructed rules that constantly yeah, and they're really strict, some of them anyway. So he's absolutely determined he was going to do this route on site and flash it. And he was at the crux of the hardest move, which was nearly at the top, so it was quite a long way up with a bit of a run out. And he was really, really struggling. And somebody walking past shouted, "Oh, if you just move your hand up 3 inches, there's a good crimp," or whatever. No. But then he realised he was too short to reach it anyway. And he's like, "Do I get the on-site? Because I did it, but somebody gave me beta, but it was rubbish because it didn't work for me. I don't have those effectivities."
Yeah. Oh, that's a good. So yeah, it can be good and bad at times, but yeah, no, I think it's good. I don't know if you know. Here's a good question about doing a task analysis of your sport resources. I don't know if I know of anything that specifically. There's a lot of good books, for example, understanding the information. I could point you to books on how to understand the information available to control movements in your sport. But that's just part of it. So I don't know if I can't think of any good resources that go through the whole process, but yeah. So the idea, I think, why you're asking this before you venture into, I think it's a good idea to understand, what are the demands of your sport?
Yeah.
What's the information? What's the kind of the basic movement solutions and things like that. But yeah.
I think we've got a nice bit of resource. It is on the paywall, unfortunately. UK
Okay.
It is like £35 a year, whatever. That's Newcomb created on this, and again, it's a constraints task analysis, so it wouldn't go into a particular sport, which I think is where he's coming from. So this would be, what are the constraints in front of you? So what's going on, what's in the environment, the individual, and the task constraints are there, and that's like, I think if you're a master chef, that's your ingredients, isn't it? Okay, let's really understand what ingredients we've got here today now, and that really identifying what your task entails. Craig made me smile when he said he talked about canoe slalom. It's just fast and clean. It doesn't need to look good. It's fast and clean. Don't hit any gates and get down there as fast as possible. So thinking about like, how can you strip out and simplify the what you're looking for. And I think what he's getting at there, which is what we alluded to earlier, and I don't think there are enough things to design for, is like activities that help you do that analysis.
Yes, for sure.
In front of you. And I think probably that's a place where we could definitely, as a entire community can build more resources. So instead of activities to solve a problem, what about the activity to identify what you might work on in the first place?
For sure. I think that you're right. And I think it would be good. I find myself doing this a lot with, when people are talking about certain techniques, and I had a discussion with a lacrosse coach the other few weeks, and they're talking about teaching people to throw with two hands overhand, and I'm like, why? Why? What is that? Is that a goal? Is you get like they were moving away for a minute. Why can't you throw underhand? Right? You'll see when you do this, the tasks are almost all outcome based, not technique. Unless you're talking about gymnastics or something where you're getting form score. So I think it's useful when you think that way. It frees up your way from focus on technique.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that I have done, which is sort of sits into this, is think about, can my warm up be, because warm-ups I find warm-ups are really strange, and they're definitely underutilized in my opinion. People just do lots of repetition stuff and think, I just need to get, the heart pumping, blood going around the body, loosen up some of those joints, get synovial fluid and etc. Raise temperature. Whereas actually I think there's a couple of things that we could be doing there. It's the best time to have a retention test to see what's been learned from the last time. While you've got a clean slate, like, where are they? Before you wipe that slate with any information or other activities, allows you to see what they're doing. And potentially that could also be a little bit of your observation analysis. So can you set something up as part of the warm-up that's just an easy version of the activity?
Yes.
And hopefully picking up on something that you did last time. So you can use it as your retention test. You can see how they're moving. Again, see if there's anything different in them and what's happening, but then be able to slowly build it up, like you say, till you spot some coachable moments. So can you ramp up a couple of constraints to go, if I think about mine, okay, let's have a little bit of faster water or a crossing there, or a little bit of a harder eddy line, and see, so that you just gently perturb, as it were, this, and just see what happens. But you're kind of going through those. But
no, I agree. I think warm up such a kind of underutilized time. I think there's so many interesting and different things you could do that instead of a hurdler stretch or something like static stretch. So much, you get people loose.
I get someone else to do it. I mean, I hear somebody else does the warm up and then they come and arrive with them. And again, it's really alien to the sports that I do. You would never do that, because you need to. You're the one who needs to see how they're doing.
Well, that's good. Well, I think, Marianne, we're almost out of time. I'm going to wrap it up here. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate your time. Hope you're still working. You almost finished, went through your whole beer. We kept you so long. So, So I appreciate it. I'll let you sign off, Marianne. Then I'm going to sign off. So thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Congratulations again.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate your time, as always. Like, you've been a big contributor over the years, so thank you, as always. Some great help there with the questions. So
thank you.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Yep. So thanks everyone for joining me. That was a lot of fun. I hope we gave some. Unfortunately, I didn't get to all the questions. I had a couple ones I wanted to mention. I had people ask about resources, right? So I get asked, what are good books, so and so, to read to learn more. I just started this. I'll add more to it. This is Amazon page I created, amazon.com/shop/Rob Gray. I've tried to create this. I've tried to make lists of books that I think are good, like getting into the basics of ecological dynamics, ones that talk more about applying it to specific sports. And this is what I have so far. I'll keep adding to this. And one's kind of general science, like David Epstein's book Range is a really one, refers to skill acquisition. I think it's a fun read if you want to, if you're really into this. So I'll keep adding to that. This up front, this site, if you can buy these books directly from here, the same way you order from Amazon anytime. If you do that, a little bit comes back to the podcast. You can help me out, support some stuff. So if you're interested, also I'll just mention a couple of things, other things I've added to the podcast. So in Patreon, I have a coaching group. We meet every couple of weeks. We have a Zoom call where we just kind of do the same thing we did today. What are some of the challenges you're facing, and kind of people. We have an incredibly wide range of sports, and people talk through things, and I think it's really useful. I'm also going to start a more reading group where we pick a particular article and focus more on the theoretical side of things and less on the application. So those things. But thanks everyone for joining me. Thanks for the great questions, and thanks for listening and not getting tired of my voice after 500 episodes. As I said, this isn't a time where I'm going to say I'm ending it, because I'm happy to keep going along with this. So I'll watch for more new stuff to come. So thanks for joining me, everyone, and we'll see you later.